The officer looked at her, standing on her own front walk, and told her that people like her did not live in a neighborhood like this. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She only asked for his name and his badge number, and then she said 7 words that he would still be hearing years later. "Tomorrow, you will remember every word you just said." 14 hours later, he was standing at attention in a hall full of 500 people, saluting her. This is the story of Vanessa Carter, the house her father spent 40 years paying for, and the afternoon a badge meant something it could not intimidate. There is a particular kind of light that falls on Northern Virginia in late September. It comes in low and gold across the tobacco-colored hills, and it makes even ordinary brick look like something out of a painting. Anyone who grew up in that part of the country knows that light. It is the light of football season and burning leaves and the smell of somebody's chimney, working for the first time since March. That was the light falling on Pennyfield Lane in the town of Belhaven Ridge on the 29th of September, when a silver sedan turned off the main road and rolled slowly to a stop in front of number 14. The woman who stepped out of the car was 49 years old. Her name was Vanessa Carter. She was 5'7", with her hair pulled back plain and simple, and she wore a gray sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up, faded jeans, and a pair of work boots that had been resoled twice. There was nothing about her that afternoon that would have caused a stranger to look twice, and that, as it turned out, was exactly the problem. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk and looked up at the house. It was a 2-story colonial, white clapboard with black shutters, built in 1927 and added on to twice since. There was a wide porch across the front, with a swing at the north end, and an oak tree in the yard, so old that the roots had begun lifting the flagstones near the walk. The paint on the porch rail was peeling in one long strip. The gutters needed cleaning. Somebody had let the boxwoods go shaggy. Vanessa noticed all of it, and none of it bothered her. She had been picturing this house for 11 months, and in every one of those pictures, the gutters had needed cleaning too. Her father had bought this house in 1984. That fact meant very little to the people who lived on Pennyfield Lane in the present day, most of whom had arrived within the last decade and paid 7 figures for the privilege. But it had meant a great deal to Samuel Carter. He had worked 31 years at the Regional Postal Distribution Center out on Route 9, the last 14 of them on the overnight sort, and he had taken a second job on Saturdays at a lumber yard because the mortgage on a house in a neighborhood like this one was never meant for a man like him. Samuel Carter had bought the house anyway. He had bought it in a year when 3 separate banks found reasons to lose his paperwork, and he had bought it because he had made a decision somewhere around the age of 30 that his daughter was going to grow up on a street with sidewalks and streetlights and a school that had its own library. He had paid the note off in 2011 at the age of 68. He had celebrated by buying a rotisserie chicken and eating it on the porch swing by himself because his daughter was 11,000 miles away that year, wearing a uniform. He died the previous September, in the front bedroom, with the window open because he liked hearing the oak tree. Today was the anniversary. 1 year to the day. Vanessa opened the trunk of the sedan. There were 9 boxes in it, most of them ordinary. Books, a coffee grinder, a photo album, 2 sets of sheets. But one box, the smallest, was different. It was a flat gray case about the size of a briefcase, and inside it was a folded dress uniform, a rack of ribbons, 4 medals in their fitted cases, and a sealed envelope with her name written across the front in her father's handwriting. She had not opened the envelope. She had carried it for 11 months, and she had not opened it, because opening it would mean it was the last thing he would ever say to her, and she had not been ready for the last thing. She lifted the first box out of the trunk and carried it up the walk. She was on her 3rd trip when she noticed the woman across the street. The house at number 17 had changed hands in the spring. The new owner was somewhere in her middle 40s, dressed for a tennis lesson she was not going to, and she had come out onto her own porch with a phone in her hand and a certain rigid quality to the way she was standing. Vanessa gave her a nod. It was the reflex of a woman who had been raised by a man who believed you greeted your neighbors. The woman did not nod back. She turned slightly, put the phone to her ear, and stepped behind the porch column. Vanessa carried the box inside. If she had been a different woman, a younger one, or one who had lived a smaller life, she might have felt the first cold finger of worry right then. But Vanessa Carter had spent 22 years in situations where worry was a luxury, and she had trained herself out of it a long time ago. She simply noted the woman, noted the phone, noted the angle of the body, and filed it. She went back out for the fourth box. The gray case was the sixth. She carried it up the walk with both hands, the way you carry something that cannot be dropped, and she was setting it down inside the front door when she heard the sound of a car engine slowing on Pennyfield Lane. The patrol car came to a stop at an angle across the end of her driveway, blocking the sedan in. That detail mattered later. It matters now. The officer who got out was 37 years old. His name was Mark Reynolds, and he had been with the Bellhaven Ridge Police Department for 9 years. He was a big man, 6'2", with a runner's build gone slightly heavy in the last few seasons, and he wore his sunglasses pushed up on his head in a way that a certain kind of man believes is casual. He did not walk toward her the way you walk toward a homeowner. He walked toward her the way you walk toward a situation. "Ma'am." He stopped about 8 feet away, angled, one hand resting on his belt. "I need you to step away from the vehicle." Vanessa straightened up slowly. She had been kneeling by the trunk. She let her hands hang open at her sides, palms visible without being asked. It was not fear. It was arithmetic. "Good afternoon, officer," she said. "Is there a problem? We got a call about a possible break-in at this address." "There's no break-in." Her voice was level and unhurried. "This is my house. I moved back in this morning." Mark Reynolds looked at her. He looked at the gray sweatshirt and the resoled boots, and the 11-year-old sedan with the Georgia plates. He looked past her at the white clapboard colonial with the black shutters and the oak tree, and something moved behind his eyes. A small, fast calculation that he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain to people, and never once succeed. "Ma'am," he said, "people like you don't live in this neighborhood." The words came out flat, almost bored. He did not lean on them. That was the worst part. A man who shouts is at least aware that he has said something. Mark Reynolds said it the way a man reads a weather report. Vanessa did not move. She did not blink. "Would you like to say that again?" she said. "Or would you rather I remembered it the way you said it the first time?" His jaw shifted. "I'd like to see some identification. It's in my purse." "Inside the house, on the kitchen counter. The deed is in the top box in the front hall. It has my name on it, Vanessa L. Carter. The property records for this county are available online, and you have a computer in your vehicle. I'd like you to put your hands on the hood of my car." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Somewhere down the street, a lawn sprinkler ticked over and started its arc. "Officer Reynolds," she said, reading the nameplate on his chest, "I want you to understand something. I'm going to do what you ask. I want you to remember that I did it without raising my voice, without resisting, and without touching you. Because at some point in the future, somebody is going to ask you exactly how I behaved, and I want your memory to be very clear." Then she turned and walked to the patrol car and placed both palms flat on the warm hood. Here is what the neighbors on Pennyfield Lane saw over the next 11 minutes. They saw a woman standing spread against the hood of a police cruiser in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, in the gold September light, while an officer went through her pockets. They saw him take her keys, her phone, and a folded receipt from a hardware store. They saw him pull her arms back behind her, one at a time, and put handcuffs on her. They saw her flinch once, a small involuntary tightening across the shoulders when he drew her left arm back and up. That flinch had a reason. The reason was a piece of surgical hardware and a scar that ran 4 inches under her left collarbone, and it had been put there by a physician's assistant in a field hospital outside Kandahar in the summer of 2011. But Officer Reynolds did not know that, and Vanessa did not tell him, because she had made a decision the moment the handcuffs came out. He was not going to say one single word to this man that she would have to defend later. At least 4 phones came up in 4 windows. Not one door opened. That is the detail this story turns on, and it deserves to be said plainly. There were 19 houses on Pennyfield Lane. Vanessa Carter recognized 2 of the faces in those windows. Mr. Harold Beckett at number 11 had played dominoes with her father on that porch swing every other Thursday for 6 years. Mrs. Eileen Prosser at number 6 had brought a chicken casserole to the funeral and cried in the kitchen, and told Vanessa that Sam Carter was the finest man on this street. Both of them watched from behind the glass. Neither of them came outside. The woman from number 17 did come outside eventually. Her name was Patricia Blanchard, and she came as far as her own mailbox, arms folded, and said, in the voice of a person doing a civic duty, "I called. I didn't know who she was. She was carrying things out of the car." "Ma'am, go back inside," Reynolds said, not unkindly. He said it the way you'd speak to a witness you were protecting. Patricia Blanchard went back inside. Vanessa, with her cheek 4 inches from the hood of a police car, said, "You said out." "I was carrying them in." Nobody answered her. Officer Reynolds walked her to the back of the cruiser, but did not put her in it. He left her standing there in the driveway in handcuffs, in full view of the street, while he ran her name. "Vanessa Carter," she said, when he asked. "Carter. Date of birth is March 4th, 1975. Any warrants I should know about?" "No." "Any weapons on you?" "No." "You got a record?" "No." He typed. He waited. The radio muttered something and he answered it in the clipped half-language of dispatch. Vanessa stood in her father's driveway, under her father's oak tree, with her hands fastened behind her back, and she looked at the porch. The swing was still there. The chain on the left side had a link her father had replaced himself in 2003, and it was a slightly different color from the others, and you could see it from where she was standing. "What's your badge number, officer?" He glanced up. "Excuse me?" "Your badge number, and your full name, and the name of your supervising officer." He almost laughed. It came out through his nose. "You think writing my name down is going to change something?" Vanessa Carter turned her head and looked directly at him, and her voice, when it came, was perfectly calm and perfectly clear, and 3 separate phone recordings caught it. "No," she said, "but tomorrow, you're going to remember every word you just said. To understand what happened the next morning, you have to understand what was inside the gray case sitting in the front hallway, 12 feet from where Vanessa Carter stood in handcuffs. Vanessa enlisted in 1994, a few months after her 19th birthday, over her father's objection. Samuel Carter had not wanted the Army for his daughter. He had wanted the University of Virginia, and he had said so at the kitchen table in words that got louder than he intended. Vanessa had said, and this is exactly how she said it, "Daddy, you spent your whole life proving you belonged in a place. I'm going to go somewhere they have to promote you on paper." They did not speak for 4 months. Then he drove 11 hours to her graduation from basic training, and stood in the back with his hat in his hands, and cried where he thought nobody could see him. She was commissioned in 1998. She served 22 years. She served in the Balkans as a lieutenant. She served 2 tours in Iraq. She served 3 in Afghanistan. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, she got a master's degree in logistics management, and became, by the accounting of the people who worked for her, one of the most competent movers of people and material that the Transportation Corps had produced in that generation. But the thing that put the medals in the box happened on the 16th of June, 2011. Vanessa Carter was a lieutenant colonel then, riding in the 3rd vehicle of a 9-vehicle convoy on a supply route east of Kandahar. It was not supposed to be a combat mission. It was fuel, water, and medical supplies moving between 2 forward positions, and she was in that convoy for the most ordinary reason imaginable. She had gone forward to look at a distribution problem herself, instead of reading about it in a report. The lead vehicle struck a buried charge at 4:40 in the afternoon. The convoy was then engaged from 2 elevated positions on the north side of the road. The official language for what happened next takes up 2 pages, and the official language is very dry. What it says, when you strip it down, is this: the convoy commander was wounded and unconscious in the first 90 seconds. The senior non-commissioned officer was pinned. Communications with the relief element were degraded for 11 minutes. And a 36-year-old lieutenant colonel who was, by every rule of common sense, a passenger on that road, got out of an armored vehicle, took control of a formation that was coming apart, and spent the next 40 minutes reorganizing it. She moved 4 wounded soldiers from 2 disabled vehicles to covered positions. She did it in 3 trips. On the 3rd trip, she was hit high in the left shoulder, and she did not stop. And there are 7 living men who will tell you that in exactly those words if you ever meet one of them. She got everyone off that road. Every single one. She spent 9 weeks in a hospital in Germany, and 4 months after that, learning to lift her left arm above her head again. She was promoted to full colonel in 2014. She retired in 2016. For that day on the road east of Kandahar, she received the Silver Star. She also received a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star from an earlier tour, the Legion of Merit, and a Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. All of it was in that gray case in the front hall. Now here is the part that matters more than the medals. When Vanessa Carter retired, she did not become a defense consultant. She did not take a board seat. She did not put COL, U.S. Army, RET, in the signature line of her emails, and she did not put a decal on her back windshield. And in the years she had lived and worked in Georgia, exactly 3 people knew what she had done. She came home in 2019 because her father was diagnosed, and she spent the next 5 years driving up on weekends and then, at the end, living in the front bedroom with him. She cooked for him. She read to him. She drove him to 61 appointments. When he could no longer manage the stairs, she moved his bed to the parlor and slept in a chair beside it for 11 weeks. She was not a colonel in that house. She was Sam Carter's daughter. And when he died, and she finally packed up her life in Georgia and drove north with 9 boxes in the trunk to move into the house her father had spent 40 years paying for, she did not arrive in a uniform. She arrived in a gray sweatshirt and boots. That is the whole story, right there. Everything after this is just the world catching up to it. 22 minutes into it, Officer Reynolds decided he wanted to go inside the house. "I need to walk through the residence," he said. "Confirm there's nobody else in there." "No," Vanessa said. "Ma'am, you don't have a warrant, you don't have consent, and you don't have exigent circumstances, because the only person you were called about is standing in front of you in your handcuffs." She said it evenly, without heat, the way a person recites something they have known for a long time. Run the deed. Belhaven Ridge is in this county. The land records are digitized back to 1979. It will take you 90 seconds. You seem to know a whole lot about search law. "I do. Now why is that?" "Because I've spent my adult life around rules," Vanessa said, "and I've noticed they get applied differently depending on who's standing in the driveway." His face closed. "Keep it up and I'll add obstruction." "Obstruction of what, officer?" "I've answered every question. I haven't moved my hands. I gave you my date of birth before you asked twice. I could take you in right now." "You could." She looked at him steadily. "Would you like me to tell you what happens after that? Is that a threat?" "It's a schedule." He took a step toward her and she did not move an inch, and something in the fact that she did not move seemed to make him angrier than anything she had said. "Officer Reynolds," she said quietly, "I'd like you to contact Chief Hayes." That stopped him. "Chief Hayes," he repeated. "William Hayes, your chief of police." And Mark Reynolds said the sentence that would, within 24 hours, be repeated in a room containing 300 veterans, 4 county supervisors, and a reporter from the Belhaven Ledger. "Don't stand in my driveway and try to scare me with important names." My driveway. He said it without hearing it. He was standing in the driveway of a house that a postal worker had bought in 1984 and paid off in 2011, and he said my driveway, and he did not hear it, and Vanessa Carter heard it so clearly that she felt the shape of it settle into her chest and stay. The second unit arrived at 5:34 in the afternoon. Sergeant Daniel Whitmore was 58 years old and had been a police officer for 31 years, 26 of them in Belhaven Ridge. He drove a car with a bad shock in the rear left corner, and he had a way of getting out of it slowly that had less to do with his knees than with his philosophy. He had learned a long time ago that the first officer on a scene sets the temperature, and the second officer's job is to change it. He took in the driveway in one long look, the woman in handcuffs, the angle of the cruiser blocking the sedan, the 4 lit phone screens in 4 windows, the younger officer with his chin up. "Mark," he said. "Sarge, possible burglary in progress," subject was, "Uh-huh." Whitmore was already walking. He stopped in front of Vanessa. "Ma'am, my name's Dan Whitmore. Are you injured?" "No." "Are those cuffs too tight?" "They're on my left shoulder. That's a surgical joint, that's all." Whitmore's eyes went to her collarbone and back to her face, and something in his expression changed by about 2 degrees. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Vanessa Carter." He was quiet for a beat. "You Sam's girl?" And for the first time in 25 minutes, something moved in Vanessa Carter's face. "Yes, sir," she said. "I am." Sergeant Whitmore turned around and walked back to his car without another word. He was on the computer for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Then he came back and took a key off his belt. "Mark, take them off." "Sarge, I haven't confirmed." "I've confirmed it. 14 Pennyfield Lane, deeded to Samuel A. Carter, transferred by will to Vanessa L. Carter, recorded 11 months ago. It's on the county site." He looked at the younger man. "Take them off, now." The cuffs came off. Vanessa brought her arms around slowly and rolled the left shoulder twice, the way you do when a joint has been where it shouldn't. There were 2 red bands across her wrists, deeper on the left. Sergeant Whitmore took off his hat. "Ma'am, I knew your father. He and I talked at the 4th of July block party every year for 20 years. He told me about you." He paused. "I want to say that this should not have happened, and I'm sorry that it did." "Thank you, Sergeant." Then Whitmore turned and looked at Officer Reynolds and waited. The silence stretched out. It went on long enough that Patricia Blanchard, watching from behind her curtain at number 17, later described it as uncomfortable. And Mark Reynolds said this: "Next time, maybe dress so people don't get the wrong idea." Vanessa Carter had been shot at on 3 continents. She had lost soldiers. She had sat with a 19-year-old private in a hospital corridor in Landstuhl and told him about his legs. She had held her father's hand while he stopped breathing. And she said later, she said it out loud, in front of 500 people, less than 20 hours after it happened, that no single sentence in her entire life had landed on her the way that one did. Because handcuffs are a thing a man does. Dress so people don't get the wrong idea is a thing a man believes. The first one you can take off, the second one you cannot. She did not answer him. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she stepped past him, and she walked up the flagstone path her father had laid in 1991, and she went into her house and closed the door. The house was dark inside, because she had not yet found the box with the lamps. Vanessa did not turn on the overhead light. She walked through the front hall, past the 6 boxes and the gray case, past the doorway to the parlor where a hospital bed had stood for 11 weeks, and into the kitchen, and she stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists for 4 minutes. Then she went and sat down at her father's table. It was an oak table with 2 leaves, and there was a scorch mark near the north corner where somebody had set down a hot skillet in 1996, and there were 2 initials carved into the underside of it that a 9-year-old girl had put there with a paring knife and been made to sand out and had not sanded out very well. She sat there in the dark for a long time. The photograph of her father was on the mantel in the next room. She had unpacked it first, before the sheets, before the coffee. It was taken in 2005 at the Postal Center's retirement lunch for a man named Cecil. Samuel Carter was laughing in it. He had a paper cup in his hand and a tie he had owned since 1988, and he was laughing so hard his eyes had disappeared. He had been a soft-spoken man, not weak. Vanessa never once in her life confused those 2 things, but quiet. He held doors. He said sir and ma'am to teenagers. He waved at every police car that ever passed him, every single time, for 40 years. She had asked him about that once, when she was 17 and full of opinions. He had said, "Baby, I wave so they see my hand." She had not understood him for about 10 years. At some point after 9 o'clock, Vanessa got up, went to the front hall, and opened the gray case. The uniform was on top, in a garment sleeve. Below it, in a fitted tray, were the 4 medals in their cases, and the ribbon rack, and the eagles. And underneath all of it, in the bottom, was the envelope. Vanessa, in his handwriting, which slanted to the right and had never quite recovered from the stroke. She carried it back to the kitchen table and sat down and looked at it for 11 minutes. Then she opened it. It was one page, front and back, written in pencil, which is how he wrote everything. She read it twice. The second time, slowly. He wrote that he was not afraid of dying, but that he was sorry to leave her the house alone, because a house is heavy. He wrote that he had never told her the truth about 1984, that the third bank had approved the loan only after his supervisor, a man named Del Frazier, had co-signed it out of his own pocket, and that Sam had paid Del back every dollar over 9 years, and had never once mentioned it to anybody, including his wife, because he did not want his daughter growing up in a house she thought was a favor. He wrote about the day she left for basic training, and near the bottom of the second side, he wrote this, and this is the only part of the letter that Vanessa Carter has ever read aloud to another human being. Baby, there will be days when somebody looks at you and decides who you are before you open your mouth. It happened to me more times than I ever told you about. I never found a way to stop it, but I found a way to walk out the other side of it with my back straight, and that is the only inheritance I have that is worth anything. The house is just a house. Take the back straight. Love, Daddy. Vanessa Carter put her head down on her father's kitchen table and stayed there for a while. Then she stood up. She went into the front hall and picked up the gray case and carried it upstairs. She hung the uniform on the back of the bedroom door, and she found her iron in the fourth box, and she pressed the trousers on a towel on the floor because she had not unpacked the ironing board yet. She polished the eagles with a cloth. She lined the ribbons on the rack in order, a task that takes a surprising amount of time and requires you to remember every single thing you have ever done. At 2 a.m, she stood back and looked at it hanging on the door in the light of a bare bulb. And then she went down the hall to the front bedroom, and she opened the window because her father had liked to hear the oak tree, and she slept for 4 hours. Because here is the thing about the 29th of September that Officer Mark Reynolds did not know. It was the anniversary of Samuel Carter's death. And the reason Vanessa Carter had timed her move to that exact week, the reason she had driven up from Georgia with 9 boxes and a uniform in the trunk, was that at 10 o'clock the following morning, the Commonwealth of Virginia was holding its annual Gold Star and Valor Recognition ceremony at the Belhaven Ridge Veterans Memorial Center. She had been asked to attend as an honoree. She had said yes in April, and then in June she had tried to withdraw, and a retired command sergeant major named Ruth Aiello had called her on the telephone and talked to her for 50 minutes and made her say yes again. The Commonwealth Medal of Merit was to be presented to 3 people that morning, and the presenting official, according to the program that was sitting in a manila folder on the passenger seat of her sedan, was the Chief of Police of Belhaven Ridge. Chief William Hayes, Officer Mark Reynolds, Direct Commanding Officer. Mark Reynolds arrived at the Veterans Memorial Center at 7:50 the next morning, and he was, if we are being honest about it, in a decent mood. He had gone home the previous evening and told his wife about the call, and he had told it the way men tell these things. A woman got mouthy, the sergeant got involved, everybody's fine. He had slept without difficulty. He had eaten 2 eggs and a piece of toast. On the drive in, he had listened to a sports program discussing a quarterback. He was assigned to venue security. It was a good detail. Indoor, air-conditioned, 6 hours, and the department liked officers to be visible at veterans events. The center was a long, low brick building with a flag circle out front and a wall of engraved names in the lobby. By 9 o'clock, there were 400 folding chairs set up in the main hall, and people were coming through the doors in a steady stream, old men in garrison caps with unit patches sewn on them, families with children in church clothes, a color guard in the corridor squaring each other away, 2 county supervisors, a photographer from the Belhaven Ledger, and a young reporter named Elaine Prescott, who had been on the paper for 14 months and had spent most of that time covering zoning meetings. Officer Reynolds stood at the main entrance with his hands folded in front of him and greeted people. He was good at it, that has to be said, because it is true, and because it is the part that makes the whole thing worth telling. Mark Reynolds held the door for a woman with a walker. He knelt down and showed a 6-year-old his shoulder patch. He directed a confused couple to the overflow parking and walked 40 feet into the rain that was not falling to point at it. He believed, standing in that doorway, that he was one of the good ones. At 9:15, the event coordinator came by with a clipboard and gave him the rundown. 3 honorees, 2 are local. You'll see the Marchetti family. They're receiving on behalf of their son. And the third is a retired Army colonel, Silver Star recipient, and she's the last presentation, so we'll need the aisle kept clear from the north door to the stage at approximately 10:40. Yes, ma'am. What's the colonel's name? The coordinator was already walking. It's on the program, she said over her shoulder. Mark Reynolds did not pick up a program. He would think about that decision for the rest of his life. There were 200 of them on a table 9 feet from where he was standing, a stack of them, folded, cream-colored, with a gold seal. He did not pick one up. At 10:38, a car pulled into the circle at the north entrance. Officer Reynolds saw it out of the corner of his eye and moved to the door, the way he had been moving to the door all morning. He straightened his tie. He adjusted the badge on his chest, a small habit, a thumb across the shield, something he had done since his first week. The rear passenger door opened. A woman got out. She was wearing Army service uniform blues, dark blue trousers with the gold stripe, dark blue coat, white shirt, black tie. On each shoulder loop was the silver eagle of a full colonel. Above her left breast pocket were 4 rows of ribbons, and above them, a combat action badge, and above that, in the place where a person's whole life gets summarized in a square inch of enamel, the ribbon of the Silver Star. Her hair was up, her shoes were mirrors, her back was straight. She turned toward the entrance, and she looked at him. And Officer Mark Reynolds, standing at the north door of the Belhaven Ridge Veterans Memorial Center at 38 minutes past 10 on the 30th of September, felt the entire structure of the previous afternoon fall out from underneath him like a trapdoor. The polite half-smile he had been wearing for 3 hours slid off his face and did not come back. Vanessa Carter walked past him. She did not say a word. She did not look at him twice. She did not slow down, and she did not speed up, and her expression did not change by a single degree, and that, Reynolds told the review board later, in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who has finally stopped arguing, that was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. She didn't even hate me, he said. She just walked past me, like I wasn't there, and I realized that's exactly what I'd done to her. The hall was full. They had brought in 80 extra chairs, and there were people standing 3 deep along the back wall. Chief William Hayes was 61, silver-headed, with a voice made for rooms like this one. He had been chief for 9 years, and a police officer for 34, and he did the first 2 presentations with a warmth that could not be faked. Then he came back to the microphone and picked up the 3rd card. "Our final recognition this morning," he said, "is one I have been looking forward to for about 6 weeks." He read it out. He read the enlistment in 1994 and the commission in 1998. He read the Balkans and Iraq and Afghanistan. He read the promotion to colonel in the 22 years. And then he read the citation for the 16th of June, 2011, and he read it slowly, and by the 3rd paragraph the room had gone completely still. He read about a supply route east of Kandahar. He read about a lieutenant colonel who had no operational reason to be in that convoy. He read about 4 wounded soldiers and 3 trips and a gunshot wound to the left shoulder sustained on the 3rd one, and about the fact that she did not stop. He read the phrase "at great personal risk and without regard for her own safety," which is a phrase that gets used often enough that people stop hearing it, and then he looked up from the card and added, in his own words, "Ladies and gentlemen, there are 7 men alive today who came home to their families because of what this officer did on that road. 4 of them are sitting in this room." 4 men stood up in the 3rd row. 2 of them were in wheelchairs. "Please welcome," said Chief Hayes, "Colonel Vanessa L. Carter, United States Army, retired." And 500 people came up out of their chairs at once. It went on for a long time. Someone in the back started the applause into a rhythm, and the rhythm held. The color guard came to attention. The old men in garrison caps put their hands up in salutes that had not been used in 50 years, and were still perfect. Vanessa Carter walked up the center aisle. Officer Mark Reynolds was standing at the north wall, 12 feet from that aisle, and he was in uniform, and he was on duty, and the protocol was absolutely clear. He brought his hand up and held the salute as she passed. He said afterward that he did not remember making the decision to do it. He said his arm simply went up. And he said that while he was standing there with his hand at his eyebrow, watching the back of her go by, he was thinking about one specific thing, and it was not the medals. It was the flinch. That small tightening across the shoulders when he had pulled her left arm back and up. A surgical joint, she had said, and he had not asked one single question about it. Chief Hayes pinned the Commonwealth Medal of Merit above her ribbons and shook her hand and stepped back and saluted her, and then he moved aside and gave her the microphone. Vanessa Carter looked out at that room for a while before she spoke. "Thank you," she said. "Please sit down. I'm going to be brief, and it's easier if you're comfortable." They laughed a little and sat. "I want to talk about my father." And she did. For 6 minutes, she talked about Samuel Carter, about the overnight sort at the postal center on Route 9, about the Saturdays at the lumber yard, about a mortgage in 1984, and a man named Del Frazier who co-signed it, about a rotisserie chicken eaten alone on a porch swing in 2011 to celebrate the last payment. "He waved at every police car that ever passed him," she said. "Every one, for 40 years. I asked him why. When I was 17 and I thought I knew everything, he said, 'Baby, I wave so they see my hand.'" Nobody in the room moved. "He died in that house 1 year ago yesterday," Vanessa said. "I came home to it this week, and I want to tell you what happened when I got there, because I think this room is the right room to tell it in." She told it. She told it in about 90 seconds, without adjectives, in the flat, clean sequence of a woman who had written a great many after-action reports, a neighbor's phone call, a patrol car across the driveway, a request for identification that she offered to satisfy 3 separate ways, a pair of handcuffs, 25 minutes in her own driveway, 4 phones in 4 windows, and not one door opening. And a sentence. "He told me," she said, "that people like me don't live in that neighborhood." The room made a sound. It was not a gasp. It was lower than that, the sound 500 people make when they inhale at the same moment. "I want to be careful here," Vanessa said, "because it would be very easy for me to stand up here with this medal on my chest and make this about the fact that he was wrong about me. That is not the point I came here to make. That is the small version of this story, and I don't want it." She let that sit. "Because on that afternoon, I was not a colonel. I was a woman in a sweatshirt carrying a box. And a woman in a sweatshirt carrying a box has exactly the same rights on her own front walk as a colonel in dress blues. If the only reason this is wrong is that it turned out I had medals in the trunk, then we have all learned the wrong lesson, and I would rather have said nothing." Then she did the only thing she had planned in advance. She raised her left hand, and with her right she drew the cuff of her sleeve back about 2 inches and turned her wrist to the light. The mark was still there. 20 hours later, a red-purple band across the wrist bone, distinct enough that the photographer from the Ledger got it in focus from 30 feet away, and that photograph ran on the front page the following Sunday and was picked up by the wire service on Tuesday. She held it up for about 4 seconds. Then she lowered her arm and pulled her sleeve down. The hall was so quiet you could hear the air handling system in the ceiling. What happened next was not on the program. In the 11th row, on the aisle, an old man stood up. He was 81 years old. He wore a blue blazer with a Korean War veteran's pin on the lapel, and he had lived at number 11 Pennyfield Lane since 1978, and his name was Harold Beckett. He had played dominoes with Samuel Carter on that porch swing every other Thursday for 6 years. He was holding a cell phone in his hand, and the hand was shaking. "Colonel Carter," he said, and his voice cracked and he had to start again. "Colonel Carter, my name is Harold Beckett. I live across from your daddy's house," Vanessa said into the microphone quietly. "I know who you are, Mr. Beckett. I watched it from my front window." He was gripping the phone with both hands now. "I watched the whole thing, 25 minutes, and I recorded it on this telephone, because I thought I was doing something." He stopped. He looked down at the phone. "And I want to say in front of all these people that I did not open my door. Sam Carter carried my trash cans up my driveway every week for 2 years after my hip, and I stood behind a curtain and I did not open my door. Nobody in that hall said a word." "I would like to play it," Harold Beckett said, "if she'll let me." Because I don't think I ought to be the only one who has to see it. Chief Hayes was already moving toward the sound booth. Vanessa Carter looked at the old man for a long moment. "Mr. Beckett," she said, "come up here." They put it on the screen behind the stage. It was 94 seconds of vertical video shot through a window screen, and the audio was thin, and it caught the sprinkler ticking in the background, and none of that mattered at all, because you could hear every word. You could see a woman in a gray sweatshirt standing with her palms open at her sides. You could hear her say, "This is my house. I moved back in this morning." And you could hear, perfectly clearly, in a voice as flat and unbothered as a weather report, "Ma'am, people like you don't live in this neighborhood." 500 people heard it at the same time. The video ran on. It caught the handcuffs. It caught the flinch. It caught her giving her date of birth without being asked twice. And at the 80-second mark, it caught her turning her head and saying, in that same calm voice, "No. But tomorrow, you're going to remember every word you just said." The screen went dark, and in the silence, Chief William Hayes turned around, in front of everyone, and looked at the north wall. Every head in that room turned with him. Officer Mark Reynolds was standing exactly where he had been standing for the last 40 minutes. He did not run, he did not shout, he did not say that's not the whole context, or the video doesn't show what happened before, which are the two sentences that a certain kind of man reaches for at a certain kind of moment. He looked at the floor, because he had just heard his own voice in a room containing 300 veterans, 4 county supervisors, the mayor's chief of staff, 24 children, and the woman herself in dress blues with a silver star ribbon on her chest, and he had understood in one clean second that there was no version of the words "it was a misunderstanding" that was going to survive contact with that recording. Chief Hayes crossed the hall. He spoke to Reynolds quietly, for about 15 seconds. Nobody heard it except the two of them and a reporter standing 4 feet away who did not print it, and to this day has not. Then Officer Mark Reynolds unpinned his badge and unclipped his duty weapon and handed it over, and took off his radio and walked out of the north door of the Belhaven Ridge Veterans Memorial Center at 11:04 in the morning. He was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation before he reached his car. Chief Hayes came back to the front of the hall and stood beside Vanessa Carter and did not reach for the microphone, because it was not his to take. Vanessa looked out at the room. She was not smiling. There was no triumph anywhere on her face. Several people in that hall said afterward that they had expected her to look satisfied, and that the thing they could not get out of their heads was that she looked tired. "I want to say 2 things, she said, "and then I'm going to sit down. The first is to Mr. Beckett." She turned. The old man was standing beside her, holding his phone with both hands. "You came up here and told 400 people about the worst thing you ever didn't do. I want everyone in this room to understand how hard that is, and I want you to hear me say thank you." The applause started somewhere in the back, and it took a while to get through the room. "The second thing is this," Vanessa said, when it was quiet again. "A badge does not make a man honorable. A uniform doesn't either, and I'm wearing one, so I'd better mean that. There is nothing you can pin to a chest that tells you what a person is." She paused. "The way you treat somebody who has no power over you at all, that's the whole test. That's the only test there has ever been, and every single one of us gets handed that test about 4 times a week, usually when we're tired and running late, and it would be easier not to notice." She stepped back from the microphone. "Thank you for this medal. My father would have liked it very much. Please go get some coffee. I understand there are 200 donuts in the lobby, and I'd hate to be responsible for wasting them." That got the laugh she wanted. She had spent 22 years learning how to land a room, and she landed that one, and she sat down. The story got out of Belhaven Ridge within 48 hours. Elaine Prescott's article ran Sunday under a photograph of a red-purple band on a wrist bone, and by Wednesday, it had been picked up in 6 states, and by the following Monday, there were 2 satellite trucks parked at the end of Pennyfield Lane, and a man from a national morning program leaving 3 voicemails a day. Vanessa Carter did no interviews, not one. She sent a 2-sentence statement through a lawyer, and then she cleaned her gutters. The internal investigation took 11 weeks. It found what these investigations usually find, which is that the 29th of September had not come out of nowhere. There were 4 prior complaints in Mark Reynolds' file involving his conduct toward black residents of Belhaven Ridge. A man pulled over 3 times in 14 months on the same stretch of Chandler Road, twice with no citation issued. A 19-year-old asked to produce identification while sitting in a parked car outside his own apartment building. A woman questioned about the ownership of a delivery van she drove for a living. A restaurant worker walking home at 1 a.m. after a closing shift. All 4 complaints had been reviewed. All 4 had been closed as unsubstantiated, or resolved at the supervisory level, which are 2 phrases that mean a sergeant had a conversation with somebody in a parking lot. Not one of them had ever gone to a review board. Chief Hayes read that summary in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in December, and, by his own account later, sat with it for about an hour before he did anything, because the pattern in that file was not really a story about one officer. It was a story about a department that had 4 chances and took none of them, and the man who had been chief for the entire period covered by those 4 complaints was sitting in the chair reading the file. He said that out loud, on the record, at the public session in January. That has to be counted in his favor, and it is. The town wanted Mark Reynolds fired. That has to be said honestly, too. By December, there was a petition with 1,100 signatures, and a group that showed up to 2 council meetings, and a great many people who had never set foot in Belhaven Ridge writing on the internet about what should be done to him. And a fair number of them were furious when Vanessa Carter would not join them. She came to the January session and sat in the second row for 2 hours, in a plain navy blazer, no uniform, no medals. And when they called her name, she went up to the podium with a single sheet of paper. I have been asked about 100 times in the last 3 months whether I want this officer's job, she said. I want to answer that carefully, because I don't think the honest answer is going to satisfy everybody, and I'd rather be honest than satisfying. I believe Officer Reynolds should be held accountable. Firmly. On the record. With consequences that he can feel and that other officers can see. I am not here to ask anyone to be gentle with him. But I have spent 22 years in an institution that gets things wrong, and I will tell you the one thing I learned about accountability that I didn't expect to learn. If you take the man out and you do not touch the machine builds you another one, and it builds him a little quieter and a little more careful and a lot harder to catch. She looked down at her paper. There were 4 complaints in that file before mine. 4 people who walked into a building and filled out a form and were, presumably, thanked for their time. Not one of them got a hearing. Not one of them got a phone call telling them what happened. If we fire one officer in front of the cameras and every one of those 4 people still never gets a phone call, then what we have done is not justice. It is housekeeping, and I did not stand in my father's driveway in handcuffs so that this town could do some housekeeping. Then she read her 3 requests. 1. Every complaint in this department's files from the last 10 years alleging bias-based conduct gets reopened and reviewed by a panel that includes people who do not work for this department. Every complainant who can be located gets contacted personally and told what was found, including the ones where the finding is that nothing happened. 2. Mandatory training on bias and on citizens' rights for every sworn officer in Belhaven Ridge, taught by qualified instructors, on department time, with attendance recorded. Not a video, not a slide deck, not a lunch-hour seminar that everybody signs out of early. 3. She paused. This one is the one people have argued with me about. I want Officer Reynolds, as a condition of any continued employment, to sit in a room and listen to those 4 people. In person, without a union representative talking for him, and without a lawyer at his elbow. He does not get to explain himself. He does not get to give context. He listens, and when they are finished, he says one thing, and the thing he says is thank you. Somebody in the back of the room said out loud, "That's not enough." Vanessa Carter looked up. "Ma'am, I understand," she said, "and you may be right, but I've watched a lot of people get removed from a lot of positions, and I have never once seen removal change what somebody believes. Removal changes where they work. I want to know if anything else can be changed, and the only way to find out is to try it and watch." She folded her paper. Justice isn't only taking the badge, she said. Justice is making sure this doesn't happen to the next person. Take the badge if you decide you should, but do not walk out of this building thinking the badge was the problem. The council adopted all 3 recommendations in February. The review panel found 18 cases in the 10-year window that merited a second look, and it reopened 11 of them. 9 of the complainants were located and contacted personally. 2 were dead. Mark Reynolds was demoted, stripped of his patrol assignment for a full year, placed on a formal remediation program with quarterly review, ordered into the training, and required to complete the listening sessions. He completed them in April. He sat in a room at the community center on 4 separate afternoons, with no union representative and no attorney, and he listened. The man from Chandler Road talked for 50 minutes. The 19-year-old brought his mother. The woman with the delivery van did not talk about herself at all. She talked about her son, who was 12, and what she had told him about what to do with his hands. And on the 4th afternoon, the restaurant worker, a man of 34 named Anthony Reese, who had been stopped walking home at 1 in the morning after a closing shift, asked the one question that Vanessa Carter had not put on her list. "Did you ever think about it after?" he said. "Not that night. I mean the next week, the next month. Did I ever cross your mind again, one time?" And Mark Reynolds said, "No." "That's the answer I figured," Anthony Reese said. "That's the whole thing, right there. I thought about you every day for a year, and you didn't think about me one time." Reynolds did not say anything else. He was not permitted to. He said thank you, which was what he had agreed to say, and the sessions ended, and he went out to his car and sat in it in the community center parking lot until it got dark. He came to Pennyfield Lane in the middle of May, on a Saturday, in the early evening. He was not in uniform. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, and he parked at the end of the block and walked. And he stopped at the foot of the flagstone path her father had laid in 1991, and did not come any farther, because that was the one thing he had figured out how to get right. Vanessa Carter was on the porch with a bucket of soapy water and a scrub brush, working on the swing. She saw him. She set the brush down. "Colonel Carter. Mr. Reynolds." He stood there at the end of the walk with his hands at his sides. He had rehearsed something. Anyone could see he had rehearsed something. And when the moment came, he did not use it. "I've been trying for 8 months to figure out how to say this without making it about me," he said. "I don't think there's a way, so I'm going to say it badly. I looked at you for about 4 seconds. That's all it was. 4 seconds. And in 4 seconds I decided who you were, and everything I did after that was me arranging the facts to fit what I'd already decided. When you offered me the deed, I didn't hear it. When you told me about your shoulder, I didn't hear that either. It wasn't that I didn't believe you. It's that I wasn't listening, because I'd already finished thinking." He stopped. He looked up at the house. "I said my driveway. I've heard the video about 200 times, and that's the part I can't get past. It wasn't my driveway. It was your father's." Vanessa Carter did not answer for a while. She sat down on the top step and rested her forearms on her knees. "Do you want me to tell you that I forgive you?" she said. "No, ma'am." He said it fast. "That's why I waited 8 months. I didn't want to come here while there was still any chance I was doing it to get that." "Good," she nodded slowly. "Because I'm not going to. Not today. Mr. Reynolds, I want to be clear with you about something, and I'd like you to actually take it in, because you have a habit of finishing your thinking early. An apology doesn't erase what you did. It can't. There is nothing you can say on that walkway that puts me back in the person I was at 4 o'clock on the 29th of September, and there is nothing you can say that gets Mr. Beckett back the 25 minutes he spent behind his curtain. That's spent. It doesn't come back." She stood up. "But the way you live from today can keep you from doing it to somebody else. That's the only thing left on the table. That's the entire inventory. And I'd rather you spent your energy on that than on standing at the end of my walk trying to feel better." Mark Reynolds nodded. He had gone very pale. "Yes, ma'am." "Then go do that," Vanessa said. "And don't come back here to report on it. I'm not the person you have to prove it to." He turned and walked back down Pennyfield Lane toward his car. She watched him the whole way, and when he was gone, she picked up the scrub brush and finished the swing. That was 2 years ago. Near enough. Mark Reynolds is still a police officer in Belhaven Ridge. There are people who think that is a failure of this story, and there are people who think it is the entire point, and this account is not going to settle that argument for you, because it cannot be settled from the outside. He completed the remediation program. He has no further complaints in his file. He teaches 1 hour of the department's citizens' rights block to new hires, and he opens it, every single time, by playing 94 seconds of vertical video shot through a window screen, and then standing in front of the room and saying, "That's me." Sergeant Daniel Whitmore retired in the spring at 33 years. Harold Beckett died in March at 83. There were 200 people at the service, and Vanessa Carter spoke, and what she said about him was that he was a coward for 25 minutes, and a brave man for the 90 seconds that came afterward, and that if she had to choose which one to be measured by, she knew which one she would pick. Patricia Blanchard sold number 17 and moved to Charlotte. She has never spoken publicly about any of it. In fairness, she has never had to. The last thing. In the front room of number 14 Pennyfield Lane, there is a mantel over the fireplace, and on that mantel there is a photograph of a man laughing so hard his eyes have disappeared, taken at a retirement lunch in 2005, holding a paper cup, wearing a tie he had owned since 1988. And leaning against the frame, in a small folding case, is the Commonwealth Medal of Merit. It is not in a display cabinet. It is not on a wall. It is propped against a photograph, on a mantel, in a house that a postal worker bought in 1984. Outside, at the corner of Pennyfield Lane and Chandler Road, there is a small sign on 2 posts. The neighbors put it up themselves on a Saturday in June. Eileen Prosser organized it, and 11 households paid for it, including 4 who had watched from behind their curtains and had spent the better part of a year deciding what to do about that. It reads, "The Samuel Carter Neighbors Program, founded 2025, Belhaven Ridge, Virginia. Everyone has a right to belong to the place they call home. It is not a memorial, it is a working program. It runs a food pantry out of the Methodist Church basement, and it drives 14 elderly residents to medical appointments, and it has, so far, put new gutters on 3 houses belonging to people who could not climb a ladder anymore." Vanessa Carter did not name it. She was not consulted. She came home from the hardware store one Saturday afternoon, and there were 9 of her neighbors standing at the corner with a post hole digger, and Eileen Prosser turned around with dirt on her hands and said, "We didn't ask you, because you'd have said no." Vanessa stood on her porch for a long time that evening, after they had all gone home. She looked at the oak tree with the roots lifting the flagstones. She looked at the swing with the mismatched link her father replaced in 2003. She looked at the sign down at the corner with her father's name on it, catching the last of that low gold Virginia light. And for the first time since she had come back, for the first time in the whole of that long, hard, strange year, the place stopped being a house she had inherited. It felt like home. This story is not really about a police officer, and it is not really about a colonel. It is about the 4 seconds. Every one of us has them. 4 seconds where we look at a stranger and decide, before a single word is spoken, what kind of person we are looking at, and then spend the rest of the encounter arranging the evidence to agree with us. That is not a police problem. That is a human problem, and it lives in all of us, and the only defense any of us has ever had against it is the willingness to stay uncertain about a stranger for 5 seconds longer than feels comfortable. It is also about the 19 houses. One man said the words. 19 households watched him say them. 4 of them had phones up. Not one had a door open. And the truth that Harold Beckett stood up and admitted in front of 400 people is that the man in the driveway could not have done what he did for 25 straight minutes without every single one of those closed doors helping him do it. And finally, it is about a woman in a gray sweatshirt. Because the thing to hold on to is not that she turned out to be a colonel. That is the satisfying part, and satisfying is not the same as true. The truth is harder and better. She had every right to that driveway when nobody knew who she was. She had it in the sweatshirt. She had it before the medals, before the citation, before the Silver Star, before 500 people stood up in a hall in Virginia. She had it standing on her own front walk, with a box in her hands and a phone in a window across the street. And so does the next person. That is the whole thing. That is what her father meant. Take the back straight.